Recording is about to start. Yes. So I have started the recording, and a quick disclaimer: this call is being recorded, and if you don't want to get recorded, you may want to drop off now. And once again, welcome to the Azure Power Lunch, and I floor is yours, man. Take it away.
All right. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Amit. Uh, Hi, everyone. Hope everybody is doing good and happy Friday. So I'm going to quickly go over on what we covered from during last week. And this is a continuation of what we have covered. And some of the stuff we covered, but some of the stuff obviously we could not cover during the time limitation. So it has been broken down into multiple sessions. So I'm going to quickly recap what we did, what exactly Microsoft Purview is and where it fits. And we can then continue forward, and we're going to cover how to set up the custom classification, custom scan rules, business glossary, and manage attributes. And if time permits, we can look into lineage from Azure Data Factory side of it. So from last week, what we briefly covered why we need the Purview, Microsoft Purview governance. And as we have been noticing, right, the data in an enterprise has been exploding, right, significantly across the whole enterprise. We have been ingesting the data from various different sources, and especially from cloud and from NoSQL side of the data, structured and unstructured data, and keeping track of those data that are needed, especially for your driving your analysis on top of it and driving the value from it. It has been quite challenging, and we have all been seeing that people have been spending numerous time or significant time locating their data, and instead of like spending their time to drive the value from those time that they are spending to do doing the insight from those data. So this is where Purview comes into the play, where it allows you to scan your data and able to bring the data, metadata, and other stuffs along with it, and helping people to govern the data, identifying who the business owners are for that particular data, and exposing the data from a single glass of pane for all the users who have access to it, and they can search the data and then locate the data in a fast way. So I'm going to quickly cover before dive into custom classification. This is again my version of how I see the key services that are offered. So I'll just quickly walk them through so at least you can understand when I'm talking about collection or I'm talking about a classification, what that means, right? So when you set up your Purview account, which we covered last week, you need to scan the data, and in order to scan the data or sources where you are going to be bringing your metadata, you need to first set up your collection. And collection is, as I mentioned in last session, is a way to group certain sources in a logical way. So if you have a sources related to, for example, your upstream business, or let's say for your finance side of the business, you can categorize those sources and all the scans and then assign a level of permission. So certain group of sources and its metadata is associated and managed through that particular hierarchy or through that permission. And within the collection, you can have your sub collections, and this is where your let's say your collection is your organization or your enterprise, and then if your sub collection, if with your subgroups or your that you maintain within that in your enterprise. And this is where you can define your sources or register your sources and define your scan. And it remains in the boundary of this because you are able to set your permissions at a sub-collection level, and it inherits the permission from collection as well. And you can decouple that permission if you don't want to inherit. You have flexibility of that one as well. Now, once you set up your sources and once you set up your scan, in order to do the scan, what it does is it uses integration runtime there. And I mentioned during last time, there are 3 different integration runtimes offered. One is by default, Microsoft maintains that integration runtime. The other one is self-hosted runtime, and another one is a managed integration runtime. So through that, depending on your need, once you set up your scan, what it does is it goes to your whichever your source system. In this case, I'm highlighting it, let's say ADLS Gen 2. This is where you are scanning your data. What it does is when you do the scan, you apply a certain classification rule. So depending on how your rules are set, so each source has its own classification Microsoft has by default provided, but you can create your own classification rule. So for example, if you have a classification rule to identify your driver license, currently, if you look at the default classification rules, Microsoft provides a classification rule for your driving license for all the other countries as well. But if your primary business is in, let's say, in the US, you don't really need to unnecessarily scanning the driver license for the other countries. So in that case, you can create your own custom classification rules and use that classification rule to, during your scan, to apply those rules, and based on your metadata and data that's associated with at your source, it can apply those classification rules and associate it to your metadata that eventually brings. And that's how the classification rules works. Now, once the scanning is done, it brings the metadata and or the classification and lineage information, etc. How we have configured, and it stores that, bring that into a Purview storage account. And what you do there is, once you have your metadata, you need to then associate your business glossary. So there are systems which SAP or some systems, it uses technical terms when you configure your attributes and all those things. So in order to have business understand what those technical terms mean, you associate the business glossary to it, which will be your single version of truth, you may call it, or domain glossary. So not only the technical people, but business people can understand what that particular term means from a business view perspective, right? And eventually the goal of this this whole metadata or that we are collecting is to help not only business to drive, or business owner or data owners to drive, understand the data, but having a single version of truth will be eliminating any misunderstanding of certain concept. You may have 2 different meaning of the same thing. It causes a data duplication in many cases, but also double dipping in many cases when you try to summarize the data or performing any calculation on top of it. So this is where your business glossary comes into your play. There are other areas here that you can manage as part of your Purview, which is you can manage your credentials to connect to any of the sources. You can set up your private endpoints. If you want to securely connect to any of the sources, you can set those up as well. You can also have your lineage connection, where you can collect your lineage information. There are a few sources which supports lineage. Not all of them are currently supported, but again, quite a number of them are supported for lineage as well. So this really covers the bulk of it, what we covered. Plus, as I mentioned here, there are certain roles and responsibilities which you associate to a collection. So if you are admin, assigning roles to somebody and stuff like that, then you are collection admin. But the curator is the most used role. This is mainly used for your scanning activities and then managing any of the scanning or classification and all those kind of stuff. So this is where your curator comes to the play, and then data reader. Now the other thing is, once you have all your metadata collected, you are able to browse the asset which is sitting on top, and people who are external or whoever permission, sorry, can connect to it and then do the search of their metadata that they are looking for. So that's again very high level view. So let's dive into our first agenda. So defining a custom classification. Again, what this will help you during the scan is to apply certain classification to when you scan the data and bring your metadata according to those classification and assign the classification to that particular metadata. So let me open up my browser here. So again, just to quickly recap, this is your data catalog. This is where you manage or search your asset and also manage glossary. In order to do the custom classification, you go to your data map tab on this side. And this is where, as I mentioned, the first step is to you create your collection, which is something what we did. You define a high-level connection, we define a sub-connection. Each level has its own role assignment here, which you can configure. This inherits from the parent, and you can disable that inheritance if you need to be. Right, so that's you can disable that if you don't need. So that's again the first step that we did that during our last session. So now we're going to look into your classification side of it. So there are some classification which what Microsoft by default provides you, which I mentioned to you, like a certain driver license and all those things, which can detect as you scan. So what we are going to do here is we are going to create a custom classification, which I already did that, right? So you basically, this is just the name you are providing, what that classification name would mean, right? So in this case, let's say if you are looking into Twitter handle or Twitter data, so I just created this high-level classification name. Once you create the classification here or custom classification name, basically what it does is you just define the name and description. That's pretty much it, right? Now, in the next stage, what you do is you define the rules for that particular classification. And the way you can define a rule is you go into custom here. And in this case, I did this one, but basically how it works is you can define your classification rule, let's say custom classification rule, put whatever the description you need to provide. You can choose the classification name that you previously defined there, right? So in my case, it was Twitter handle. That's what the name I'm using. State is enabled, and basically you can choose regular expression. For example, in this case, what it does is now it auto detects the regular expression from, let's say, if you are loading a file, let's say you are scanning a data lake, ADLS Gen 2, and you have a data set sitting there. So if you have a sample data set that you can get hold of it, and if you upload it, for example, in my case, I already have this Twitter handle CSV file, which has your ID, handle, and URL. And basically, if I open that one, what it does is it auto detects the patterns within the document. So in this case, I'm interested in, let's say, handle, and I choose this one, and you can add this pattern here, and then you can customize this pattern if you need, right? So for example, if you are just interested in first 15 characters because the handle only supports that, you can limit certain things and all those things, and you can modify that, right, if you need. What this one allows also here is minimum match threshold. So again, if based on your configuration, what is your threshold, that matching threshold, you can adjust that one. And then you can also assign that what is your column that you are trying to match the pattern against. So once you do that, you hit create. It creates your custom classification rule here. Now the next stage it comes is your scan rule, right? So as I mentioned that once you apply the classification, you need to do the scan, and within the scan you can either choose a default scan or you can use a custom scan. So let's go to our sources here, and in my case, let's say if I am scanning Azure Data Lake in this case, and what you do is which collection you have, and then again, I mentioned to you, you use the integration runtime, so I'm leaving the default integration runtime in here. And if I continue here, and You can choose whichever particular folder that you want to scan on your storage account. So in example, if you can only specifically in this case, if I'm dealing with Twitter dataset, then I can only choose the Twitter files here or folder here. Continue here. And then here you can see a system-defined default rules which Microsoft provides based on different sources, or you can choose the rule that you created in this case. So what this now does is you can use this. So one step which I forgot to mention you here is, let me go back here, was once you create the classification, you need to create a custom rule set, right? That's what we were supposed to be using that. So here you create a custom rule set, you define your rule set name against, let's say, Azure Data Lake Gen 2, and let's say custom rule set. And then share, continue, and custom rule set. If you recall my diagram, it had a file types that you can select. So if this custom rules that you are not only interested, for example, in the Parquet file and not the other file, you can eliminate as part of this rule. And now you can only scan Parquet files. When it scans the storage account, it will only going to look for Parquet file. But if you want to scan for everything, you can also do that. In my case, all my files are in Parquet format, so I'm going to choose that. And this is where you can see, you can either keep any specific rules you want here. You can eliminate whichever rules are not applicable for, let's say, for your country or for your data set. You can eliminate those as well. And in my case, I'm only interested in the Twitter one. So what I'm going to do is I'm only going to keep this Twitter rule. And this is how it's going to scan. Your scan set rule is defined based on that. And you just continue here, and then basically you just save it, create this custom rules. And this is how I was able to use that when I went back to when I was doing the scanning part, right? So let's go back here and do the scanning here against here. So I'm gonna do a new scan, continue. Again, I'm gonna only choose the folder Twitter here, continue. And then this is where I create the scan rule set based off on the classification that I set, right, or define those. And then I continue on it. You can schedule it either weekly or monthly. There is no daily schedule at the moment, but it only supports weekly. The reason for that is the scanning is costly and also time consuming. So normally Microsoft recommends at the moment is you should scan on a weekly basis. We have also asked for this a daily feature as well. Let's see, hopefully it may come down the road as well. So once you do that, you just do your scan once, for example, and continue. It will gonna go and start scanning the data. So what that happens once the scan completes, I already done my scanning already, but you can also monitor your scans as well here as well. Whatever scans that are running. So in some cases, you can monitor that what are failed, what didn't fail, and the progress of that that particular scan. So I'm not going to run it because it takes some time. But the result of that, what happened was when I scanned that particular Twitter files, which I loaded on my ADLS account. Let me go back here. So it was here, and here are the file that I loaded, right? The Parquet file. And what happened was once the scan is complete, it will gonna give you the information about what it was able to scan. If you look at the properties or schemas, you could see that it was able to classify this account name, which matched that particular pattern, and it was able to classify that this is a Twitter handle. So that's how it really all came together for classification and scanning rule set perspective. So let's take a look now into the other features here. So let's go back here. The other thing I would like to cover here quickly is this manage attributes, which is in preview feature right now. So I had a client which was looking into, let's go back here, a way to associate a URL or tag, a custom URL or custom tag. So for example, if you have a Twitter handle here, what the customer was looking for is for a particular data set that they brought as a metadata, they wanted to associate certain links to this particular file. And the only way you could add that information was through that manage attributes, because once it loads the schema, whatever the files it found, you cannot really maintain or manage that from this UI. I mean, you could use API to add the stuffs and all those things, but not from the UI. The alternate route was, this was at a file level attribute that they wanted to, let's say, associate certain documents, links, or stuff like that, which could help them provide a guidance or guidelines document or whatever, right? It could be your use case maybe. So in that case, the way you could create is this managed attributes, and these are really an organizational level attributes that are either at a organization level or sub-organization level, or depending on your need, how you want to use it. But the way you do is you create a attribute group, which could be your higher level organization. In this case, I just create finance in this case, or department or whatever you may have. And then you can create all your sub group in here or attributes in here. If you have multiple attributes that you want to manage under a particular department, you can do that. And then once you do, let's say in this case, I'm going to create a new group. HR probably, let's say. And then what you do is you can now create an attribute that you wanted to maintain. I don't know if you want to say HR document link or something like that. And then you can associate to whichever particular group you want. You can also mention whether it's a drop down or it is a multiple choice or whatever it could be. It supports various different data types here. So I'll keep it text because since I'm going to put in the URL here. Now you can associate this particular tag to a particular type of your data set. So in this case, let's say I was interested in the storage ones. So I'm going to, let's say, just choose particular some of the storage accounts here. Just for the sake perspective, apply, for example, and then create. So now, once it's created, once you go back to now sources, which you have scanned, let's say, because I applied that particular attribute to a storage only, any files which are scanned from the storage, for example, in this case, Twitter handle was loaded from or scanned from a storage account, you will be able to add attributes to this particular scan file. So you come here, you add attribute, and it's going to show you only attributes which are associated to that particular the file type it is scanned from the storage, right? So that's why you are seeing this one. So let's say if I choose HR link here, and then you can provide whatever that link that you were planning to provide there, right? And then you just save it here. So that's how you can add a managed attributes if you need to. So that's something I wanted to cover as well. The other quick thing I just wanted to cover, I know we have very limited time here, is a way to bring a lineage data from, let's say, Azure Data Factory. So in order to bring the data from Data Factory, first thing you have to do is in the management here, you need to connect to a Data Factory workspace environment. And then by clicking on this new here, you choose your subscription, for example, and then you can just choose whichever your Data factory environment is already set it up. I already set this one up here, so I don't have to really do that. So the other thing then, once you establish this connection, you can go back to your data bricks, sorry, the ADF here. And then once you create this pipeline here, which is basically a copy activity, in this case, I'm just reading the data from source file, from a Twitter file, which I mentioned to you. And basically what I'm doing here is I'm aggregating all the files and then dumping that file, merged file into one single merged file into another folder. So basically that's what I'm doing here. It is really outputting this file to another folder in the same storage account. That's what I'm really doing that. And basically it's merging the files. So if you have 10 files, merges into one file and dumps it. So once you run this particular pipeline, I already executed this pipeline. You go back to your your purview here, and then let's go back and do the search here. So you can do a browse asset in a different ways. You can browse asset by source as well. So let's say I did enable that for Azure Data Factory in this case. So you can come here, look at it in Data Factory, whichever job that you ran, and basically you can click on that particular pipeline that you ran, and then you are able to see the lineage of that particular data that you have loaded. So basically what you did was you loaded the data set from this two containers here, or two different files here, and then basically it merged those data set into a single file called merge here. So the other way you can also look at is if you go and search for the file that you have merged into. So you can do a quick search here, a merged parquet in this case, and this is a file it produced. You can also go directly from here, from search, and then if you go into the lineage, it will tell you where this particular file came from and how it was really composed from, right? So basically you can see that it has been coming from this particular two files. You ran this particular data factory activity in this case, and then that data factory activity has produced this particular file. So that's how the lineage works. And as many jobs or as many pipelines that you run, you will be able to start seeing those data set popping up in here in your search area. So we are pretty close to our time. I will just leave 2 minutes for any questions that you guys may have. Let me check the.
I don't see any questions in the chat window yet. Yeah, I don't see any questions so far.
Okay. And if no question is there, I'm gonna just quickly show you. You can do a browsing your asset from here. So you can just do search for any of your asset. Let's say file by state or something. It will gonna give you a way to really filter down or narrow down your data set. So you could, let's say, based on a certain classification, you can filter certain data set down, or by a object type, you can also narrow down your, so if you have a certain tables that you are interested in, which you may have scanned from a databases, then you can also do that, filter that down. You can also filter down by certain grocery term and stuff like that. So there are various different ways you can filter down your data set if your list of the data set is quite huge. I mean, I'm assuming that if you're scanning all your assets on your enterprise, you're going to have numerous amount of data sets sitting here. And this filtering capabilities will help you narrow down your search that you are looking. The other way I was mentioning to you about was you can also go back and browse by type. And let's say if you know that you are only interested in SQL database only sources, and you can also come down here and you can choose which are particular SQL database that you are interested in. Maybe you are also interested in particular table, then you can also come here, schema here, sorry, the data set here, and then you can choose whichever table that you are interested in that one, and then you could be able to see the information from here as well. So that's all I wanted to cover today. Hopefully in the next call, we can dive into how this integrates with Synapse and some additional features that I would like to cover. The file copy, or sorry, the file link that basically it eliminates the copy of your file that normally you copy the file from your storage account to another storage account. This whole Purview now offers this. You don't need to copy the data, and you can share the data with not only with the internal organization, but external organization without copying the data. So I'm going to go around some of those features down the road. There are also other features which are allowing you to manage your governance aspects of it, where you can, from Purview, you can assign permission to your assets. Once you have a certain permission granted, you can maintain your permissions from here. So if somebody asks a request for some certain asset, and if data owners, you can set a workflow as well, and data owner gets a request, data owner can just click from here directly, and that user can get access to that as resource. It could be a database or whatever it may be. So that will be some additional stuff that I'm going to plan to cover during our next sessions.
Folks, please feel free to unmute, and if you have any questions, or post in the chat window.
So I see one question about, will you be covering data quality? Down the road, I will gonna cover that. It is in the private right now, but I'm not gonna dive into that until it is fully preview mode. So yes, definitely.
Any other questions, folks?
Encrypted data set. So there is a labeling there, which is again in preview. What you can do is you can define your label, and basically the sensitivity and all this information. You can, whatever the sensitivity has been defined at the source, those information carry forward. So it is called labeling here. I have a link here. And basically what you do is that those classification, it really comes from sources itself and travels through the data along with it. And not only whoever consumes this data, we're going to get that particular certain labeling. And if it has a certain sensitivity associated to it, it can treat the data according to it. So let's say if you consume this data, let's say in Power BI as well, the sensitivity labeling travels along with it, and whatever the sensitivity you see at the source, you will gonna also see that same sensitivity at Power BI once you consume that data or search the data through Purview, right? So yes, you can do that as well.
Oh, thank you. So if there are no other questions, thank you everyone, and thank you, Nayat, for delivering this very useful session. And hope to see everybody next week for another session of Azure Power Lunch. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I'm going to stop recording now.
All right, thank you, everyone.